We are continuing our theme for the month of November, spiritually motivated leadership. And our topic today is be wise. And we know we have a lot of wisdom in this room. My favorite, one of the services, I was asking how many years have you all been on the spiritual path. There's a lot of experience in this room. And when I looked up wisdom, it was about having experience, knowledge that informs good judgment. And I just want to use the word judgment not as a value statement, bad or good, but judgment like discernment, effective, that which works better in our life. So the more spiritual experience that we have, the more effective we can be in our decision making. So how pervasive is this need to be wise? When you think about this morning, you all woke up this morning and you're here, it shows immense wisdom. So thank you. You've already mastered the topic. No need to go on. But I will, just to fill space. We actually don't I think of using wisdom on basic routines. Just when you think of this morning, how much wisdom did really this morning take? I mean, you have a routine, you get up, you have breakfast, you get dressed, you come here, or whatever your routines are. And when we feel like we really need wisdom is with great conflict, things that are difficult in our life, whether it's personal, relationships, health, finances, or situational at work, relationships with family, what's happening in the world. So that's when we feel like we really need wisdom, is when there's a heavy conflict. What I believe, however, that experience part, it's that daily routine that actually allows for that wisdom to be activated in the more difficult periods of our life. So I came up with 3 points of how to activate wisdom. This talk started coming to me on a Monday all week long, so I actually have a lot of stuff, so I just narrowed it down to 3 points. And a book. That's why I had the extra 2 hours. So the first is just inviting the divine presence. Actually, I'm going to go just an invitation. Number 1 is an invitation. Because there's both inviting Spirit into our life, but also Spirit invites us into its life. And that we want to be aware of both invitations. Wisdom is really being aware of both ascension and descension. Ascension is us waking up to our higher realms, to our other, what I would call subtle causal bodies, our higher ways of being, and becoming more and more familiar of what that is. That's beyond the physical world, beyond of what we know here on this earth physical plane. And then wisdom is also allowing and carrying it down into our everyday life. Now, we talk about spiritual practices a lot in our community here because the purpose of spiritual practices is for us to wake up to these higher realms. It's Spirit's invitation. Spirit is always inviting us to know itself better as us at these higher realms. And the way we do that is through our spiritual practices. What happens, though, is we start thinking the spiritual practices themselves become the thing itself. So we want to be clear that the spiritual practices are a means to answer the invitation, but they are not the fulfillment of the invitation. Does that make sense? They are the means to the answer of the invitation, but they are not the fulfillment of the invitation. And I'm going to use something that's not what we don't think of as spiritual. I was thinking back in the 1990s, I got up to running about 36 miles a week, and I started off very slowly, and it just slowly built up. And when I think about, Jack and I are going to take a Plant Strong course in January. And the question they keep asking us is, what is our motivation for taking the course? Why do we want to do it? And they don't want to be healthy, or they really want to get core, because it's a total change of eating, so you have to really be committed. What is your motivation? So I've been thinking about not only my motivation for that, but what has been my motivation in the past. And I was thinking about what motivated me to run so much. And the reason why I was motivated to run was not to become a runner. That thought never even occurred to me. I never thought about running races or competing. Agape is a spiritual community down in Los Angeles, and I'd gone to an Agape picnic. And all these people were playing, and I was about 20 pounds overweight, and I was just out of shape, and I couldn't have fun. And that really bothered me because I always liked to play, and it was limiting my play. And I just said, that's not happening to me again. If I ever go to a picnic again, I'm going to be in shape. And that was my motivation, was play, delight, joy. And that's what got me up every morning to run. So the running itself wasn't the purpose. So I'm looking at meditation. The meditation itself, sometimes, and he was joking, we get into this competition with our own self with meditation. My brother, when he started meditating, he would text me, he's like, how long do you meditate for? He goes, I got to make sure I at least match it or beat it. Such a sibling thing to do. And he was kidding, but it was great because it sort of speaks to sometimes, well, did you have really cool experiences when you meditated? Where did you go when you meditated? I went here. I don't think any of us are overt enough, but sometimes we're thinking those meditation becomes a thing that we can feel proud of, and we immediately miss the purpose if we're doing meditation as a prideful check in the box. Meditation is our answer to the invitation to the divine, so we're available to it, so we can start seeing the divine and knowing the divine beyond our world. It's our answer to the invitation. And then we invite the divine into our world. The more connected we feel when we're doing these spiritual practices, the more we connect with the divine. We're not asking a stranger to come into our world at this point. We're asking something that we've become very familiar with, something that we've become intimate with, into our very life. And when we practice it with even the most mundane things, I remember Reverend Barbara King, she's a minister, incredible minister, if you ever get to hear any of her talks in Atlanta. I remember her talking about how she talks to God about everything. I go to the closet and I say, okay, God, what am I going to wear today? Let's talk about this. What am I going to eat today? What's for my lunch? What's for my dinner? So it's inviting the divine into the everyday aspect of our life. And the more we do our spiritual practices, we actually start to hear this communion that's happening about what we would consider mundane and non-essential things. Why would Spirit care what I'm going to wear? Well, Spirit's in everything. We say every week, there's only one power, one presence. It is in, through, and as all creation. It transcends it, but it's in all of it. And so if we start saying, well, that's unimportant, that's too small, then we're missing the understanding that the divine is in everything, even in the mundane smallness of our life, the minutia of life. And so as we invite the divine into our life, and that becomes a practice, through those very difficult situations, we start opening and allowing Spirit and saying, I don't know how to handle this on my own. I don't know what's going on. I need your help. And it's now a very comfortable relationship where we feel safe. If we don't feel safe with what we're inviting into our home, we're not going to be very open. But when we feel safe, we allow this divine presence into our life for its help, for its assistance, for its guidance, for its wisdom, for its power, for its grace. So number one, invitation. Answer the invitation from Spirit. Answer the invitation for us to wake up to it and make the invitation, invite Spirit into its life as us. So that's one. Two, seems fairly obvious, but we still have to remember, once we make the invitation, we really have to listen. Now, listening is something that we talk a lot about, and we do exercises in our classes to listen to one another. But recently, I just had this remembrance of a time when I was listened to. My Uncle Sherman is 90 and in hospice, and he gave me an experience of what listening really is. He's my dad's brother, closest in age, and brilliant like my dad, but just he went more the arts route, where my dad went the political route. And I was afraid of him. I just kept hearing how smart he was all the time. So even though he's been my uncle for a very long time, I sort of stayed away from him at family reunions because I was just intimidated. And so really, I didn't have a full, just polite stuff, but I didn't have a real full conversation with him until my dad's memorial, we were in the reception space, and we found ourselves on the couch with. He's introverted too, so the two of us, we don't do small talk, and we're not really great in social situations. So we found ourselves on the couch together, and I was like, oh no, now what? And somehow we were at a memorial, so the topic came up about life after death, and I was just clear about. Yes, I'm very clear that there's life after death, and I shared with him my experience that I had when I was a little girl of becoming one in the Christ, which I've shared many times. As I was telling the stories, I just realized something. He was really listening to me. He was just interested. I remember Reverend Michael talks about the difference between curiosity and interest, and I always thought it was a semantic thing, but I got the difference. Curiosity is sort of, you just want to fulfill, like, okay, this is what the experience was, and you can sort of list off what the experience was, okay, I got that information, versus interested. He was keyed in. He wanted to know. He started asking me questions. No one ever asked me questions I hadn't even thought about. He just really wanted to know all about it. And the thing was he had no agenda. I did not feel like he was asking me and wanting to know about it to argue or think about what he thought about it versus what my experience was. There was nothing going on in him. It was just pure, unconditional listening to know who I was. I left that conversation. It was so odd to me that I'd been so intimidated. I felt so valued, so respected just by that mere act of someone really listening to an experience. And it slowed me down. I share things a lot. We all share things with each other a lot. But to really be heard, it made me really self-conscious and say, what am I saying? What does this mean to have someone care that deeply? When we are invited by Spirit to know it, are we really listening without agenda? Are we really listening to what Spirit wants to reveal about itself beyond what we have ever known before? Can we release, well, that makes me uncomfortable, or I don't really, can we just be open? As I mentioned, many of us have been on this journey, most of us, I would say, in this room have been on this journey for a very long time. Are we still willing to have that beginner's mind, that willingness to hear something that we've never heard before? Are we willing to listen and hear things that might make us uncomfortable? I read somewhere recently, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, we have to be willing to be interrupted by God. We have our habit patterns of how we do things. When we really listen to Spirit, Spirit doesn't have past precedent. It's not basing its truth on anything that we've ever known before. So often what it wants to reveal is something we've never known before or done before or understood before. So it's going to shift us a little bit. Are we available to shift, to have our life be interrupted in a moment? So the invitation is to really listen to Spirit. And then as we invite Spirit into our life, if we're going to invite Spirit into our life, we have to be good hosts and really listen to what it wants to tell us. And sometimes it's just little things. This past Friday, I get up in the morning and I go to the gym. So it's 5 o'clock in the morning, I got all my gym clothes on, and this image of Starbucks kept coming to me, and it was coming in I'm very lofty. And the night before, Starbucks was coming to me. So I actually sat down and I listened. I said, okay, now is this just me not wanting to go to the gym, which is very plausible? Or is this Spirit really wanting me to go to Starbucks instead of go to the gym? And I decided, I wasn't totally sure, but I was pretty sure it was Spirit asking me to sort of change my routine. So I got all my gym clothes off, put on my regular clothes, and went to Starbucks. I always sit at this one table at Starbucks. It's just myself and a chair and a table. Well, my little position had 3 chairs. They added a table and a chairs. And I said, oh, I'm supposed to be listening to more than just my one divine teacher. I'm supposed to invite these other teachers to the table. And as I'm journaling, they're giving me some information. By the way, one of the things, for those of you who do journal or even just pray by listening, because I journal every day, I do get the same thing over and over. Sometimes I often run out of things to say, so I often will just begin with, what do you want me to know? Like, I'm just here. I don't have agenda because I've written it all yesterday. What do you want me to know? So I'm listening. It's giving me some information that I never heard before in all these years. That always amazes me. When we say Spirit's infinite, that we're not kidding. It's just always giving us new information. And I said, oh, it was great. I went home, and an hour later, I was reading in a book something about Buddha that was exactly what I was just told that morning. And that morning, I wouldn't have heard it just with my main teacher. I needed these other teachers. It was sort of outside that realm of what I was seeing. So it needed to open me up a little bit beyond. And I'm not sure I would have done that if I hadn't gone to Starbucks. For whatever reason, at that moment, I was available. I was listening. I was paying attention. I was outside my routine. And I heard something, and then when it was validated an hour later, said, what you were being told was right on. Let our life be interrupted when we're listening. That we have our agendas, we have our routines, we have our habit patterns, and they serve us, and they're healthy. We like structure. Structure is very good for us. And are we willing to be interrupted by the divine infinite presence? When we make an invitation into Spirit, are we willing to actually listen to what it wants to tell us? Or are we listening to what we want to hear? Are we listening for the answer we want to hear, or are we willing to just be without condition, hear what it wants to say, tell us about our life? So we make the invitation to Spirit to come into our life, even as we're answering the invitation to awaken. We listen to these higher realms. We learn about these higher realms. We become more and more intimate with these higher realms, and we're inviting these higher realms into our life, and we're listening to what it wants to tell us about our life in the specifics, mundane things. And then lastly, we act on it, if there's something to act on. So for instance, when I had my conversation with Uncle Sherman, it was just the act of listening that was healing, that was beautiful, that was that deep connection. There wasn't anything left to do after that. There was no action step. We just went our separate ways. I think deeply touched by the communication, but there wasn't anything to follow. So sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. I love the YouTube video. I'm sure most of you have seen it, but I'm just going to remind you of it because it's funny. I just chuckle and I just listen to it. When you see a couple talking on a couch, the boyfriend is facing the girlfriend, and she is sharing her feelings. She is very upset and stressed. And he says, I know, but... And she says, no, I don't want you to fix me. There's nothing to do here. I just want you to hear my feelings. I'm so stressed. And I have this throbbing headache because I'm so stressed. And I don't feel like you're hearing me. He's like, yeah, but no, but. And then you see her turn to the side, and she's a big nail in her head. Sometimes it's just easier to fix it. So sometimes it is just listening, but sometimes action really helps. So when we're listening, what action, what am I invited to change something in my life? Am I invited to do something? The example for me this past week was Jack, Julian, and I saw the film Harriet, about Harriet Tubman. Has anyone else seen that here? Nice. Yeah, a few of you. Yeah, was it good? Really powerful. And what I got from it, and I was talking with Julian last night, and he felt very much the same way. Harriet listened to the divine within her. She had these vision spells. She got hit in the head when she was 13, and from that she would go and sort of fall into a spell, and in those spells she would have visions. It's funny because I was reading a review in the Washington Post about the movie. It was, I thought, a really bad review, missing the point. But they're sort of saying, well, she felt she was hearing God, and I read a few other things, sort of like, well, that's silly. Of course, she wasn't hearing God because there's no God. But of course, we know the difference. She was a slave who had no education, could not read. She took herself and fled out of slavery on what? On her own will? No. She was listening to the presence within her. She was a spiritually motivated leader. She was inviting the divine into her life. She was willing to let it disrupt the world that she was in, and because no one else was escaping, none of her. She couldn't. Her husband was actually already free, but living down there. Her parents, her sister had been sold away. There was no one there to support her leaving, she wasn't following anyone's example except for the divine presence within her. Sharing a name with Harriet Tubman, I've been aware of her and read about her. But the one thing that I really enjoyed, I can't say I enjoyed about the movie, and there are poetic license with some of the story, but there's no question, because I read it in the book, how dangerous what she did was. But it's one thing to read that as a sentence that's really dangerous for her to do this, but to actually see it, to feel the vibration of your life is on the line. People are chasing you. They're after you. They don't like you because you're trying to escape, and which means you're giving ideas to other slaves. So if they find you, they're going to really punish you to prevent other slaves. So the intensity of that and the willingness, because I was just talking about something very mundane like what clothes to wear or coming to church on a Sunday morning, but when we're really intensely connected with the divine, it's going to help us with very severe, difficult, what seems impossible situations. Slavery is an impossible situation, and yet the divine, in her listening, supported her in finding her freedom. Then she found some stability in Philadelphia, but knew that her family was still back, so she made a trip. They're saying, how are you going to do this by yourself? She says, I follow God. She went back into slave country, again, risking her life. Easy to say, much harder to do. To help other people escape, you can't take too many people all at once because that becomes hard to travel. So she went back enough times to save about 70 people, taking, I think 9 or 10 was the most she took all at once. So she risked her life over, and for her family as well. It wasn't just all strangers, but anyone she was helping free to slavery, and then she ended up fighting with a platoon to help free slaves during the Civil War. I mean, she's an extraordinary woman. Based on what? Her parenting, her family life, her education? No, one thing. Listening, inviting Spirit into her life, listening to what she's hearing and acting on it, having the courage to act on something that most people would have said was ridiculous and impossible. And she lived until she was 90 or 91. When I first started on the spiritual path, how many of you are familiar with Joel Goldsmith? Most of you, great. If you're not, he's a wonderful, he's a New Thought writer, what I would consider a mystic New Thought. And he was my first introduction, actually, to New Thought, other than people like Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra, but I mean the historical New Thought. And he begins every one of his books with this, and I think it's had a huge influence on how I've lived my life spiritually, and I think of it with Harriet Tubman as well. I also think of it because my brother, when I was little, was arguing for atheism, and he said people who believed in God, they need God as a crutch because they are too weak to live life by themselves. And what Joel Goldsmith is saying here is it's the opposite, where God is the only thing that you live for. You don't use any other crutches in this world. Money, fame, power, self-reliance, well, human self-reliance, ego self-reliance, divine self-reliance. So this is what Joel Goldsmith puts at the front of every one of his books. Illumination dissolves all material ties and binds people together with the golden chains of spiritual understanding. It acknowledges only the leadership of God. It has no ritual or rule but the divine love. No other worship than the inner flame that is ever lit at the shrine of spirit. This union is a free state of spiritual sisterhood and brotherhood. The only restraint is the discipline of the soul. Therefore, we know liberty without license. We are a united universe without physical limits, a divine service to God without ceremony or creed, the illumined walk without fear, but by grace. Harriet Tubman was living by nothing other than the divine presence within her that was revealing itself to her. Spiritually motivated leadership is when we are living from, through, and as spirit, and we are depending on that and that alone. My feeling is the more we are responding to the Spirit within us and listening to it, the more harmonious our world becomes, because we are spiritually motivated from within. We don't need to tell other people what to do, and they don't need to tell us what to do. But there's only one power, one presence. It's in harmony with itself all of the time. The more of us that are following and listening to the divine presence, first, foremost, and always, first and last, the divine presence within us, the more we move in harmony with one another, the less we are bumping up against each other. Because the bumping up, that comes from a world, the hypnosis of this world is telling us we should be doing this or we should be doing that, and we get lost and we get confused, and should I be doing this? But when we're following from within, there is this level of confidence, there's a level of boldness, there's a level of abundance that nothing of this world could ever deny. So wisdom, living a life of wisdom, having all this experience that's in this room, is this experience of knowing the divine, of being willing to learn from the divine, learn about the divine, in ways that we've never heard before. No matter how long we've been on this journey, it's nothing compared to the infinite, eternal nature of pure spirit. So we are continually answering, so to be wise leaders, spiritually motivated wise leaders, we are continually answering Spirit's ever-present invitation to know itself as us at higher and higher realms, and to do everyday practices that make us available to know ourselves at those higher realms. And at the same time, inviting the divine into our daily life, to the mundaneness of our daily life and the very difficult, painful things that seem impossible to move beyond. When we open to Spirit, ways are made that we could not imagine. And we listen. We allow ourselves to be interrupted. We allow our habit patterns to be interrupted, our ways of thinking to be interrupted, to allow something new to be birthed in our life in this form. So we can see with fresh eyes, so we can act. And then we move into the third step. We act then with a fresh way of being. I love that Harriet Tubman was called Moses. Doing the impossible. Again, Moses, led completely by Spirit. We are in a world where we are needed. Everyone in this room. Everyone here is a unique expression. When I say we, I mean really the divine needs every one of our unique expressions. It needs us. It's always inviting us, please listen to the divine presence within you, because you're going to find something inside of you that no one else in this room is hearing. You're going to be getting guidance that nobody else in this room is going to be getting. You need to follow it. Well, you don't need to. I just highly suggest it. The more we follow it, the greater joy, the greater play. I was thinking, I'll end with this. Cindy Wigglesworth was a person who's writing about spiritual IQ and was saying, well, we can sort of tell people who've been on the spiritual path because these qualities start to get developed. And she came up with her two wings, and it was compassion and wisdom. And I was thinking about that, and I really like the wisdom one. And the compassion one I like, but it wasn't resonating. We all have our own answers. And I recognize for me, play is the essential wing to wisdom, because wisdom goes down into the depth. Wisdom is like Harriet Tubman. It goes into the place where we're the most stuck, where we're slaves, and that wisdom is listening to Spirit and having the courage and the boldness to move out of slavery. And it can feel very heavy if we don't also come with a sense of delightness and joy. I love Sri Aurobindo said that the entire reason why this universe was created was for delight and joy. So even as I'm talking about being bold, being abundant, being wise, all of this is divine. When we live and move and have our being, answering the invitation, saying yes, everything that Spirit is going to be, I believe, lead us to is greater and greater joy, greater and greater delight. The spiritual teachers that I tend to resonate with are the ones who are having a good time, because Spirit is never afraid. Spirit it's in the darkness, but it's not limited by the darkness. There's a freedom. It knows that it sees the darkness, but it's actually the answer to the darkness. It's the light within the darkness. It never loses its joy. It never loses its love, its creativity, its abundance. It's everything that we would call good. That is what Spirit is all of the time. So as we continue to say yes to that voice within us in a way that no one else is hearing it, the more and more we are going to discover this deep and abiding joy. And as you're looking at wisdom this week, the invitation, the listening, and the action, just as a little mental exercise, what would be the opposite for you? So for her, it was compassion was the other wing. For me, it's play. What would that be for you? Wisdom and what? What would be? For me, it's all love. You can't have wisdom without love. Intelligence, to me, is wisdom without love. Intelligence moved into the heart is wisdom. That's a whole other thing. I'm sorry. Part of my play is just putting all these pieces together. So I'd be curious. I'd be curious to hear from you. I love after service. I hope you have these conversations too. Some of you have the greatest things to say after service, and the whole time I'm thinking, darn, I wish I could have said that. So have the conversations afterwards. Besides wisdom, what would be your other wing? What are the two qualities that really make a difference to help you fly through this beautiful earth plane and existence? Spiritually motivated leaders. I'm in a room with you all today. I'm so grateful to be in that room. And I invite us again, be bold, be abundant, invite the divine into our lives, listen to it without agenda, be willing to be interrupted by it, and take action. Spiritually motivated leaders. Let's pray. And how grateful I am that we as a collective energy in this room, right here and right now, we have come up with this practice of praying together. So even though there's only one person talking, the fact is we're all praying together because we are all consciously recognizing that there is only one power, one presence, and it's the source of all of us individually. It's not out there, it's within us. And so we come together in this room to collectively say yes to this oneness that is the source of every one of us in this room, that is the source of everything that is this planet Earth, that is the source of all time and all dimensions in all of its multitude ways of expressing, and beyond all dimensions of time and space, beyond any human concept or idea is this one power and this one presence. It is always already. We don't make it happen. It is fully realized right here and right now. All the love, the peace, the joy, the harmony, the grace that has ever been and ever will be is right here and right now, activated through our collective consciousness. We answer that invitation when we come to collectively together and say yes to this oneness and this power and this presence. So we just take a moment just to breathe in and say yes to this wonderful invitation to know the divine beyond anything we've ever known prior to this point. We say yes to it lifting us up to higher and higher planes of existence. Not just for this prayer, but for our entire week this week, we are saying yes to the divine, to awakening to its truth, to its realities beyond whatever we've ever known before, to willing to go past that into new ways of seeing and new ways of knowing. We are willing to listen all week long to the divine with no agenda, just to hear what it wants to tell us. And collectively in this moment, we say yes to anything it is telling us in this moment about our own unique journey. Each and every one of us has our own unique journey. It is absolutely important. It is valuable. It is essential. And you have ways that you are being guided that is absolutely unique to you. We are listening now to that infinite oneness as it wants to speak through each of us individually. Each and every one of us so loved, and love itself. No separation. We give thanks and we are in awe of the power of this love that is even now revealing itself uniquely as each and every one of us. that we can collectively be in the same room and feel our deep and powerful connection beyond time and space with one another without knowing each other's histories and stories. We are absolutely the most intimate people can be because we know the truth of each other, that we are the spiritual presence and likeness of spirit, of divine. And even as we are connected in this oneness in this room, we feel our uniqueness, that everyone in front of us, behind us, to the side of us, has this incredible, unique conversation with the divine. And the divine is having a unique conversation with itself as each of us. Prayers are being answered right here and right now. Ours, the people that we love, people in our communities, our work communities, our family communities, our spiritual communities, and the planet community. Prayers are being answered. Miracles are happening because we're saying yes. We're allowing our lives to be interrupted right here and right now. And in allowing our lives to be interrupted, answers are happening. New ways of seeing, new ways of doing, new ways of expressing. We are the spiritually guided leaders of this planet Earth right here in this room. We're not waiting for someone else. There's nobody else. It's us. We are the ones. Today, in this moment, in this prayer, we recognize that we are being called to be spiritual leaders right here and right now on this planet Earth at this time in this place. We feel it, we know it, we celebrate it, and we thank God for it. Thank you, infinite love and intelligence of this universe. Thank you for being alive and awake as each and every one of us, for saying yes and delighting and expanding into greater joy and harmony and peace than we can possibly imagine by our yes here today. There is something magnificent that has happened here, and I give thanks. I am in awe. I let it be in gratitude, in joy, in an unlimited peace. And I invite us all to today together now. And so it is. Amen and amen.
So it is. And so it is. And so it is. Amen. 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 And so it is.